Okay, so dealing with difficult conversations, when handled well, these will put you and your client and your firm in the strongest and most sustainable position moving forward, because you're ready to then adapt and change and ultimately influence as the circumstance requires. Conflict and different perspectives are natural, and therefore being able to have these difficult conversations is a competitive asset, because it can be an engine for learning and innovation, and thereby result in sustainable, creative commercial outcomes. So there are three main types of difficult conversations. There's the what happened, who's to blame conversation. And when considering truth and intentions and blame, we often assume that we or our clients are right, which in turn means that the other party must be wrong. And then this can naturally block outcomes and cause friction. However, difficult conversations are almost never about getting all the facts right, and it's worth keeping that in mind. Rather, difficult conversations are about conflicting perceptions, interpretations and values. So for example, it's very rarely about what the contract actually says, but rather it's about what it means to each party, how it's interpreted, what will the result be, and what is important to them. So instead, we've got to shift our purpose from proving we're right to understanding the perceptions and interpretations and values of both sides. So moving away from delivering messages and towards asking questions, exploring how each person is making sense of the world, contract, or the dispute, opens up this collaborative space again. We also assume we know the intentions behind the other's actions, but we don't. We're just guessing and drawing inferences based on their behaviour. So rarely it gives us the full picture. Our motivations are complex, and so are the other parties. So we need to understand them to get a better understanding of the problem and the source of the problem, so we can explore those options. So blame is problematic. We don't care where the blame lands so long as it's not on our side. This is similar to talking about truth. It produces and fuels disagreement and denial and does little for learning. It evokes fear and causes those negotiation blockages or amygdala responses, because no one wants to be blamed. So then we spend our energy going into defending our position rather than finding a solution and how to avoid it in the future. So instead, try to visit the same conversation with learning and understanding in mind. The second type of difficult conversation is feelings conversations. So it doesn't matter what type of conversation or dispute you're in, emotions are always there at the core. They are integral to conflict. As I've said in my opening about disappointment and unfairness and disrespect or undermining or anger, resentment, guilt, sadness. In the presence of strong emotions, many of us shy away from them, particularly in work and negotiation, and try hard to stay rational and think that getting too deep into feelings can be messy, which they can sometimes, and sometimes it's not appropriate. But acknowledging them and not being afraid of them is equally important, particularly so that you can overcome any obstacles that they might be putting in the way of reaching that resolution. So if the feelings are the issue at the end of the day, you've done very little to resolve the dispute if you've simply avoided them. And remember that retirement village example I gave you and the bank, of that slight acknowledgement of could have done things better, no, things are tough for you, really sorry, and it totally changed the dynamics. Then there's the identity conversation. Often this is the most challenging of all conversations, that inner conversation that we have with ourselves. We need to remember that the other party is having these conversations with themselves as well. So in order to be able to influence and have difficult conversations, we need to be aware of these identity conversations and seeing how we can influence everybody's inner conversation. And they might be conversations of self-image, self-worth, esteem or self-doubt. But the moment we're aware of them, we know that there's that undercurrent, then that will assist us in how we communicate with the other party. Because you'll be sure that the other party and their representative, they're having their own inner conversations too. So this inner dialogue can cause an imbalance. And that's where I was saying to you, be prepared to answer those difficult questions. You know, the worst question you could possibly be asked may cause you to lose balance if you're particularly having a day of self-doubt or moment of, I don't know if we're on the right track here, or lose concentration. So being aware of the conversation, being aware of your strategy and how to overcome it is very important. And that's my, junior lawyer example that I gave you before too. Just being aware of the fact that you may be anxious on the day gives you an inner strength, because you know what it is, you've identified it, you've got a solution, and you know how you're going to respond to it if necessary. Okay, so recognize any attack, how it makes you feel, and what you're saying to yourself, and have a plan. And keeping your eye on the prize. So my eye was on the prize when I had that run-in with that barrister when I was a junior lawyer, and the prize was reaching an acceptable compromise and commercial outcome for my client, making them happy. Okay, another of my favourite tips is to consider what you don't know. What's the elephant in the room? Listening to learn. And the number of times I've sat down with parties before a mediation and said, okay, is there anything that you would like me to know that's not on the papers that would assist me, or you'd just like to share with me in private before we start? That question will crack open a chest of treasures more often than not, which will give me insight into the dynamics, but also options for resolution. Some of which, could be that the business partners actually grew up as lifelong friends, and the friendship took a turn for the worse along the way, which otherwise would not have been available in the pleadings. So the words reveal only the surface of what's really going on, I often find, and we need to understand that it's not only about what's being said, in fact it's what's not being said. We need to understand this when we're dealing with people, so that we can overcome any stumbling blocks early on. So we're moving towards a learning conversation. Once you approach the challenge in each of these three types of difficult conversations this way, you're more likely to find that your purpose for having the conversation also begins to shift, as will the outcome. And remember, you're only likely to influence the outcome if the other party trusts and respects you. So if everyone believes their own view is right and assumes that the other's position is based in self-interest, progress in negotiations and difficult discussions often grind to a halt. So companies and people that nurture and hone these communication skills as a core competence will leave their competitors and opponents behind generally. But your opponents won't even know that they've been influenced until it's already happened, if you've handled it well.